There are people in your life who always seem to need help. They call when things fall apart. They show up when the money runs out. They reach out when the pain gets too heavy to carry alone. And you help, because that's who you are. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. The calls got more frequent. The problems never resolved. And every time you thought things were getting better, they weren't. You started waking up tired, not from work, not from your own problems, but from carrying weight that was never supposed to be yours. If that sounds familiar, stay with me. Because what I'm about to show you isn't about becoming cold. It isn't about turning your back on people who genuinely need support. It's about something the Bible makes very clear and that most good people spend years refusing to see. Some people don't need more help. They need to take responsibility for their own lives. And the longer you protect them from that, the more of yourself you lose. I've been there. Some of the most emotionally exhausting seasons of my life came from trying to save people who had no intention of changing. I thought I was being faithful. I thought I was being loving. But I was confusing compassion with something else entirely. There's a type of person who appears to be the most desperate of all, the one who seems to need you the most. But the more you give, the worse things get. And I'll show you exactly who that is before this video ends. In the next few minutes, we're going to look at 8 types of people the Bible warns us about. Not to judge them, but to protect yourself, your peace, and your ability to genuinely love the people who are actually ready to receive it. Pay close attention, because you've probably already met all of them. Before we get into this, I want to say something quickly. If you're the kind of person who's always trying to help, always showing up, always giving, this channel exists for you. The content here is built around one thing: helping good people develop the emotional and spiritual discernment to navigate difficult relationships without losing themselves in the process. If that resonates with you, subscribe. There's a lot more coming that you're going to want to see. And if this video speaks to something you've been carrying, leave a like. Because there are people watching right now who are being quietly consumed by guilt and by a sense of responsibility that was never theirs to begin with. Your like helps this reach them. Now, let's get into it. Most good people were never taught the difference between compassion and enabling. They were taught to give, to serve, to be there, to put others first. And those are good things, genuinely good things. But no one taught them what to do when giving stops producing change, when serving starts producing dependence, when being there becomes the reason someone never learns to stand on their own. The Bible is full of instructions about generosity, mercy, and love for others. That's not in question here. But the same Bible that tells you to love your neighbor also tells you in Matthew 7, verse 6, not to give what is holy to dogs, and not to throw your pearls before swine. That's not a cruel verse. It's a discernment verse. It's telling you that not every person who appears to need something is ready to receive what you have to offer. And giving to someone who isn't ready doesn't help them. It just costs you. Proverbs 22, verses 24 and 25, warns you not to make friends with an angry man, not to associate with someone given to anger, or you may learn their ways and set a trap for yourself. Notice what that's saying. It's not just saying that difficult people are unpleasant to be around. It's saying they're dangerous to your formation. That prolonged exposure to certain types of people shapes you in ways you don't even notice. And that's the part most good people miss entirely. They think the risk of helping the wrong person is just wasted time and wasted energy. But the real risk is deeper than that. The real risk is who you become in the process. When you spend years absorbing someone else's chaos, carrying someone else's consequences, and softening someone else's reality, you don't just get tired. You start to lose your own sense of what's real, what's your responsibility and what isn't, where you end and where they begin. And here's what makes it harder. These 8 types of people we're about to look at don't announce themselves. They don't walk in and say, "I'm here to drain you emotionally." They walk in looking like they need you. And that's exactly what makes them so difficult to recognize. So before you say this doesn't apply to you, I want you to think about someone in your life right now, someone you've helped more than once, someone whose situation never seems to improve, someone who leaves you feeling heavier than when the conversation started. Keep that person in mind, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what's been happening. Let's start with type 8. Type 8 is the permanent emotional dependent. This is the person who always has a crisis. Not occasionally, not during genuinely hard seasons, always. When one problem resolves, another one appears. When one emergency passes, a new one is already forming. The details change. The desperation stays exactly the same. And every time you show up, they're relieved, grateful even. For a moment, things seem better. But they never actually get better. Because getting better would require something this person isn't willing to do. It would require them to stop outsourcing their emotional stability to the people around them. Here's what you need to understand about the permanent emotional dependent. Their need for you isn't about the crisis. The crisis is just the vehicle. What they actually need is to feel that someone is always available, always concerned, always within reach. The problem on the surface keeps changing because that's not the real problem. The real problem is that they never develop the internal capacity to regulate their own emotions, face their own fears, or sit with discomfort without immediately pulling someone else into it. And every time you respond to the crisis, you accidentally confirm two things. First, that their way of reaching out works. Second, that they don't need to develop any other way. You're not helping them build anything. You're helping them avoid building anything. 2 Thessalonians 3 verse 10 says this, "If anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat." Now that verse is often read in the context of physical laziness, but the principle underneath it applies much more broadly. There is a form of emotional laziness that the Bible does not excuse. The refusal to do the hard internal work of growing, of taking ownership, of facing reality without always needing someone to absorb the weight with you. Helping someone who refuses to do that work doesn't make you loving. It makes you a buffer between them and the growth they need. The sign that you're dealing with a permanent emotional dependent is simple. Ask yourself this: in all the time you've been helping this person, have they actually changed? Or have they just moved from one crisis to the next, always with you close enough to call? If the answer is the second one, you're not their support. You're their substitute. And that's not love. That's a very comfortable arrangement for one of you. Type 7 is the chronic victim. This person has a story, and the story never changes. The world is against them. People have always mistreated them. Nothing ever works out. Every opportunity that came close got taken away. Every relationship ended because of what someone else did. Every failure has an explanation, and the explanation always points somewhere else. Now, I want to be careful here, because real pain is real. Real injustice exists. Real trauma leaves real marks. There are people who have genuinely suffered, and they deserve compassion. But there's a difference between someone who has been through something hard and is working through it, and someone who has built their entire identity around being the person things happen to. The chronic victim isn't processing pain. They're living inside it permanently. And more than that, they're using it. Because victimhood, when it becomes an identity, does something very specific. It removes responsibility. If everything bad that happens to you is always someone else's fault, then you never have to change. You never have to examine your patterns. You never have to ask what role you played. You just need someone to agree that life has been unfair to you. And if you're a good person, you'll probably give them that, over and over again. Ecclesiastes 7 verse 21 says, "Do not take to heart all the things that people say." That's wisdom about discernment and listening. Not everything someone tells you about themselves or about their situation deserves to be fully absorbed, because the chronic victim is a storyteller. And the story is carefully constructed to produce one specific response from you: sympathy that never asks questions. The moment you ask a question, things shift. The moment you gently suggest that maybe they had some part in what happened, the warmth disappears. Suddenly, you don't understand. Suddenly, you're just like everyone else. That reaction is information. Healthy people can receive honest perspective from someone who cares about them. They might not love hearing it, but they can sit with it. The chronic victim can't, because honest perspective threatens the story, and the story is the foundation everything else is built on. Here's the hard truth about this type of person: you cannot help them by agreeing with them. Every time you validate the narrative without questioning it, you're helping them stay exactly where they are. Real help would look like honesty, but they're not asking for honesty. They're asking for an audience. And if you keep showing up as one, that's exactly what you'll remain. Type 6 is the guilt manipulator. This one is harder to recognize because on the surface, they don't look like they're manipulating anyone. They look like they're hurting, and they might actually be hurting. That's what makes this type so difficult to deal with. The guilt manipulator has learned, often without even realizing it, that expressing pain in the right way produces results. That if they frame their suffering correctly, the people around them will adjust their behavior to make that suffering stop. They don't ask for what they want directly. They make you feel responsible for their emotional state until you give it to them. It sounds like this. After everything I've done for you, I just thought you cared more than that. I guess I was wrong about you. I don't want to be a burden, so I won't ask again. I'll be fine. I always end up alone anyway. Notice what each of those phrases does. None of them make a direct request, but all of them create pressure. They position you as the cause of someone else's pain, and they leave the door open for you to fix it by doing what they want. And if you're a person who genuinely cares about others, that pressure works on you because you don't want to be the reason someone is hurting. So you adjust, you apologize, you give in, you show up when you didn't plan to, you say yes when you meant to say no. And for a moment, they feel better. Until the next time. Proverbs 26 verses 4 and 5 gives us a striking piece of wisdom. It says, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be just like him. Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes." Those two verses seem to contradict each other, but they don't. They're describing a dilemma. Sometimes engaging makes you part of the problem. Sometimes not engaging lets the problem grow. There is no easy formula. That's exactly the point. Dealing with a guilt manipulator puts you in that same impossible position. If you respond to the guilt, you reinforce the behavior. If you don't respond, you feel like a cruel person. That tension is not an accident. It's the mechanism. The guilt manipulator, whether consciously or not, has discovered that keeping you in that tension gives them control. And as long as you're trying to resolve the tension by adjusting your behavior, the control remains. The way out isn't to become hard. It isn't to stop caring. The way out is to separate their emotional state from your responsibility for it. You can care about someone's pain without accepting that you caused it. You can love someone without allowing their feelings to become the permanent deciding factor in every choice you make. That's not coldness. That's the boundary the Bible assumes you have when it tells you to love your neighbor. It never tells you to dissolve into your neighbor. The guilt manipulator needs you to forget that distinction. Your job is to remember it. Type 5 is the complainer who rejects solutions. You know this person. You've sat with them while they described a problem in detail. You listened carefully. You thought about it seriously, and then you offered something practical, a suggestion, a perspective, a possible way forward. And they said yes. Yes, but that won't work for my situation. Yes, but I already tried something like that. Yes, but you don't understand how complicated it is. Yes, but that's easy for you to say. So you tried again. Different angle, same result. Another yes, but. Another reason why nothing will work. And if you've spent enough time with this person, you've noticed something. The conversation never moves forward. It just circles. The problem stays the same size. The frustration stays the same intensity. And somehow, every solution you offer makes them dig deeper into why nothing can change. Here's what's actually happening. This person isn't coming to you for solutions. They never were. They're coming to you for something else entirely. They want to feel heard. They want company in their frustration. They want someone to sit beside them in the problem and confirm that the problem is as big and as impossible as they believe it to be. The moment you offer a solution, you accidentally step outside that role. You're no longer sitting beside them in the problem. You're suggesting they could leave it. And that's not what they came for. Now, this might sound like someone who just needs more emotional support before practical advice. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes people need to feel heard before they can hear anything else. But the complainer who rejects solutions isn't in a temporary emotional state waiting to shift. This is a pattern, a permanent posture toward their own life. And the pattern reveals something uncomfortable. At some level, staying in the problem is serving them. Maybe the problem gives them an identity. Maybe it keeps certain expectations off the table. Maybe it keeps people like you close and attentive. Maybe facing the solution would require admitting they've had the capacity to change all along. Whatever the reason, the result is the same. You keep offering, they keep refusing, and you leave the conversation having spent real emotional energy on someone who had no intention of using it. Proverbs 26, verse 4, warns against answering according to someone's folly because you'll become like them. And there's a quiet version of that happening in these conversations. When you spend enough time in circular conversations with someone who refuses to move, you start to absorb the weight of their immobility. You start carrying a problem that isn't yours, in a direction that isn't forward, for someone who isn't ready. The compassionate thing to do with this type of person isn't to keep generating solutions. It's to name what you're observing, gently, directly. Something like, "I've noticed that every time we talk about this, we end up in the same place. I care about you, but I'm not sure more conversation is actually helping either of us." That's not abandonment, that's honesty. And sometimes honesty, offered with care, is the only thing that creates enough friction to make someone actually move. But if they reject that too, then you have your answer. Some people aren't stuck because no one helped them enough. They're stuck because staying stuck is the choice they keep making, and no amount of your energy is going to change a choice you're not the one making. Type 4 is the person who only appears when they need something. You haven't heard from them in months, maybe longer, and then one day, out of nowhere, they reach out. The message is warm, familiar, almost like no time has passed. But if you pay attention, you'll notice something. The warmth arrives right before the request. It's never just to check in. It's never just because they were thinking about you. There's always something underneath it. And when you help, they disappear again, until the next time something comes up. This isn't a friendship. It's a transaction dressed up as one. What makes this type particularly difficult is the history, because there probably was a real relationship at some point. Real moments, real connection. And that history makes it harder to see what the relationship has become. But look at the pattern, not the memory. How many times has this person shown up with no agenda? How many times have they asked about your life with genuine interest and stayed long enough to actually hear the answer? If the honest answer is rarely or never, then what you have isn't a relationship that's going through a quiet season. It's a dynamic where you exist in someone's life primarily as a resource. And you deserve more than that. Type 3 is the person who drains everyone around them without realizing it. Unlike the guilt manipulator, this person isn't strategic. They're not calculating their effect on you. They're simply operating at an emotional frequency that costs everyone in their vicinity something. Every conversation tilts toward heaviness. Every interaction leaves a residue. You walk away from them feeling slightly depleted, slightly darker, slightly more burdened, even when nothing dramatic was said. Proverbs 22, verses 24 and 25, makes the warning explicit. Don't associate with someone given to anger. Don't make them your close companion, or you will learn their ways. The word learn there is important. It's not saying you'll consciously adopt their behavior. It's saying exposure shapes you whether you intend it to or not. There are people whose inner world is so consistently chaotic, so unresolved, so heavy that spending significant time with them begins to rewire how you see things, how you feel when you wake up, how much energy you have available, how hopeful or heavy your default emotional state becomes. You don't have to have a dramatic falling out with someone to recognize that their presence in your life is costing you more than it's giving. Sometimes the most honest and loving thing you can do is quietly create distance, not with cruelty, not with an explanation they didn't ask for, just with a gradual, intentional withdrawal of access. Your emotional environment is not neutral. It shapes you. Protect it. Type 2 is the person who resists every form of accountability. This person can receive encouragement indefinitely. They can absorb praise, support, and affirmation without limit. But the moment anything resembling accountability enters the conversation, something shifts. They deflect, they explain, they reframe. They find a way to make the observation about something you did, something you misunderstood, or something in your own life that disqualifies you from speaking. And if none of that works, they withdraw. They become cold. They make you feel that honesty cost you the relationship. Here's why this matters. A relationship that can only survive on agreement isn't a real relationship. It's a performance. And you're not a friend in that dynamic. You're an audience member whose only acceptable role is applause. Real relationships require the ability to say hard things and remain, to hear hard things and stay, to love someone enough to tell them the truth even when the truth is uncomfortable. If someone in your life has made it clear through repeated reactions that honesty isn't welcome, then what they're asking for isn't relationship, it's management. And managing someone's ego indefinitely at the cost of your own honesty and integrity is not love. It's a slow erosion of both of you. Type 1 is the most dangerous of all. And the reason they're the most dangerous isn't because they're the most aggressive. It isn't because they cause the most visible damage. It's because they're the hardest to see. This person looks like someone who genuinely wants to grow. They use the right language. They talk about change. They acknowledge their problems with what seems like unusual honesty and self-awareness. They ask for guidance. They respond to truth with apparent openness. They make you feel that your investment in them is actually working. And then, slowly, nothing changes. But here's what's different about this type compared to the others. With the chronic victim, the pattern is visible early. With the guilt manipulator, you eventually feel the pressure. With the complainer, the yes, buts start to accumulate. With type 1, the signals are subtle enough that you can spend years inside the dynamic before you realize what's happening. Because this person isn't rejecting your help, they're consuming it. They take your time, your wisdom, your prayers, your emotional energy, your honest words, and they use all of it to feel better in the moment without ever allowing any of it to produce real transformation. They're not doing this consciously in most cases. That's what makes it so hard to name. They genuinely believe they want to change. They genuinely feel moved in the moment. But the moment passes, the feeling fades, and the behavior remains exactly what it was. And you, because you saw the genuine emotion, because you heard the right words, because you felt the connection, you stay. You invest again. You believe again. This is what Jesus was describing in Matthew 7 verse 6. Not people who are obviously hostile, people who appear receptive but who aren't actually in a posture to receive. Pearls before swine isn't primarily about people who attack you. It's about people who cannot value what you're offering, regardless of how sincerely they seem to want it. And the most painful version of that isn't the person who rejects you openly. It's the person who receives you warmly, repeatedly, without anything ever taking root. I've known people like this, and I want to tell you something honestly. The hardest part isn't the wasted time. The hardest part is the grief. Because you genuinely cared. You genuinely believed in them. You saw something real in them, and you weren't wrong to see it. The potential was real. The moments of connection were real. But potential without movement is just a story you tell yourself about someone. And at some point, loving someone well means being honest about the difference between who they are and who you need them to be for the investment to make sense. Type 1 will keep you longer than anyone else on this list. They'll keep you because they give you just enough to stay, just enough hope, just enough progress, just enough of the person you believe they could be. And that's exactly why they're the most dangerous. Not because they're malicious, but because they're magnetic, and because your belief in them is one of the most generous things about you, which means it's also one of the things most likely to be quietly consumed. If someone in your life fits this description, I'm not telling you to walk away without thought. I'm telling you to look clearly, to measure not what they say and not what they feel in the moment, but what they actually do over time. Because time is the only honest mirror. And what time shows you about a person is the truest thing you'll ever know about them. So why do good people keep falling into these dynamics? Because the problem isn't weakness. It isn't naivety. It isn't a lack of intelligence. The problem is that the qualities that make you vulnerable to these 8 types of people are the same qualities that make you genuinely good. You feel deeply, you take responsibility seriously, you believe in people, you don't give up easily. You were taught that love is patient, that love endures, that love doesn't abandon, and you took all of that seriously in a way that a lot of people never did. That's not a flaw, that's formation. But formation without discernment creates a specific kind of blind spot. It produces people who are extraordinarily generous and extraordinarily easy to exploit. Not because they're foolish, but because their instinct is always to extend grace one more time. And grace is right. Grace is necessary. But grace was never designed to function without wisdom. The Bible doesn't present compassion and discernment as opposing forces. It presents them as partners. You cannot love well without both. Compassion without discernment becomes enabling. Discernment without compassion becomes cruelty. The goal is always both, operating together, informing each other. But here's the deeper reason good people stay too long in these dynamics. And this one is harder to say. Sometimes helping someone else is easier than facing something in yourself. When you're focused on someone else's crisis, you don't have to sit with your own questions. When you're needed, you have a clear role. When you're rescuing, you know exactly who you are and what you're supposed to do. And some people, good people, people who genuinely care, have quietly built their sense of identity around being the one who shows up, the one who doesn't give up, the one who loves when nobody else will. And that identity, as beautiful as it sounds, can become its own trap. Because if your sense of worth is connected to being needed, then you'll unconsciously seek out people who need you, even when those people aren't good for you, even when the dynamic is destroying your peace. This isn't about blame. I'm not saying you chose this consciously. I'm saying these patterns often run deeper than conscious choice, and recognizing them is the first step to something different. There's also a theological dimension to this that I think is worth naming directly. Some people have been taught, explicitly or implicitly, that saying no is the same as failing to love, that setting a limit means you don't care enough, that a truly Christ-like person absorbs everything and asks for nothing. But that's not what Jesus modeled. Jesus withdrew. Jesus said no. Jesus distinguished between the crowds and his close circle. Jesus looked at a rich young ruler who walked away and let him go. He didn't chase him. He didn't lower the standard to keep him close. He loved him enough to let the truth stand even when the truth cost the relationship. That's the model, not endless absorption, not the erasure of your own well-being in the name of someone else's comfort. Love that has no limits isn't love. It's fear dressed up as devotion, fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of being seen as someone who doesn't care enough. Real love has the courage to disappoint someone for their own good. Real love can say, I'm not going to keep participating in something that isn't helping either of us. Real love protects the relationship from dynamics that would eventually destroy it. And sometimes real love looks like stepping back, quietly, firmly, without cruelty and without apology. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally cared enough to stop pretending. Bloco nove, como ajudar sem se destruir. So what does it actually look like to help without losing yourself? Because that's the real question, not whether to help, but how to help in a way that doesn't slowly dismantle your peace, your energy, and your sense of who you are. The first thing you need to understand is this. Helping from a place of wholeness looks completely different from helping from a place of need. When you help from wholeness, you give what you genuinely have to offer, and you stop when it's been offered. You're not waiting for a particular response. You're not measuring your worth by whether the person changes. You give because giving is the right thing to do in that moment, and then you release the outcome. When you help from need, everything is heavier. You need them to receive it. You need them to change. You need the investment to produce something visible, because if it doesn't, you start to question yourself. And that need, that invisible emotional stake in their outcome, is exactly what these 8 types of people find and use. The shift starts with a simple but profound question. Am I helping this person move forward, or am I helping them stay comfortable exactly where they are? Those are not the same thing, and the difference matters enormously. Real help is sometimes uncomfortable. It tells the truth when the truth is hard. It refuses to absorb consequences that belong to someone else. It maintains expectations even when someone pushes back against them. It says, I believe you're capable of more than this, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise just to keep the peace between us. That kind of help is rarer than we think. And it's far more valuable than the kind that simply makes someone feel better in the moment without asking anything of them. The second thing you need is clarity about what you're actually responsible for. You are responsible for what you offer. You are not responsible for what someone does with it. You can speak truth. You cannot make someone receive it. You can show up with genuine care. You cannot force someone to use that care to grow. You can pray for someone, love someone, believe in someone, but you cannot want their transformation more than they want it for themselves. The moment you take on responsibility for someone else's willingness to change, you've crossed a line that was never yours to cross, and everything beyond that line will cost you without producing anything real. Third, learn to recognize the feeling that tells you something is off. Most people who have spent years in these dynamics describe a specific sensation: a heaviness after certain conversations, a low-level dread when a particular name appears on their phone, a sense of obligation that feels different from genuine desire, a tiredness that sleep doesn't fix. That feeling is information. It's not a sign that you're a bad person for feeling it. It's your inner life telling you that something in this dynamic is not right. Don't argue with it. Don't spiritualize it away by telling yourself that love is supposed to cost something. It does cost something, but it's not supposed to cost you everything indefinitely, with nothing growing on the other side. Fourth, give yourself permission to let people experience the consequences of their own choices. This one is hard, especially if you were raised in an environment where protecting people from consequences was considered loving. But consequences are often the most honest teacher someone will ever encounter, and when you consistently step in to soften them, you're not protecting someone from pain. You're protecting them from the very thing that might finally produce change. Letting someone face what they've created isn't abandonment, it's respect. It's treating them as an adult who is capable of learning from their own life. And fifth, protect your inner life with the same seriousness that you protect the people you love. Your peace is not selfish. Your emotional health is not a luxury. Your capacity to love well, to think clearly, to show up fully for the people and the purposes God has placed in your life depends entirely on you taking your own inner world seriously. A depleted person cannot give from abundance. They can only give from debt. And giving from debt is how good people end up bitter, burned out, and quietly resentful of the very act of caring. You were not designed to be consumed. You were designed to bear fruit. And fruit requires roots. Roots require soil. And soil requires protection from everything that would strip it bare. The Bible says in Matthew 7, verse 6, to be wise about where you invest what is sacred. That's not a license for selfishness. It's an instruction about stewardship. You are a steward of your own life, of your time, your energy, your emotional capacity, your spiritual clarity. And stewardship means making intentional decisions about what you give, to whom you give it, and when giving is actually serving someone's growth rather than their avoidance of it. Not every person who reaches out to you is someone you're called to pour into. Some people you're called to love from a distance. Some people you're called to pray for without proximity. Some people you're called to release, fully and without guilt, trusting that God's care for them doesn't depend on your exhaustion. Compassion is a virtue. Discernment is also a virtue. And the life God invites you into requires both, working together every single day. We talked in a previous video about the kinds of family members you should never allow into your home. And what I said there applies here too. The boundary isn't about building walls, it's about knowing what belongs inside them. Not everyone deserves access to your inner life. Not everyone has earned the right to your deepest care. And learning to tell the difference isn't a failure of love. It's the beginning of loving well. Before you go, I want to leave you with something. Everything we talked about today comes down to one sentence, and I want you to carry it with you. Not every person who needs help needs your help. That's not coldness. That's not selfishness. That's not a failure of faith or a lack of compassion. That's discernment. And discernment is one of the most underrated forms of love there is. The people in your life who are genuinely ready to receive what you have to offer, they exist. And they deserve a version of you that hasn't been slowly emptied by years of giving to people who were never going to use it. Protect that version of yourself, not for your own comfort, but for the people and the purposes that actually need what only you can give. If today's video helped you see something you hadn't been able to name before, I want you to do something. Leave a comment below and tell me which of these 8 types you've encountered most in your own life. Not to judge anyone, but because naming what you've experienced is often the first step toward finally being free of it. And if you know someone right now who is emotionally exhausted from trying to save everyone around them, share this video with them, not as a criticism, as a gift, because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is hand them the clarity they've been missing. One last thing. We covered a lot of ground today. 8 types of people, the roots of why good people stay too long, and what it actually looks like to help without destroying yourself in the process. But all of it points back to the same truth. You were not made to be consumed. You were made to bear fruit. And bearing fruit requires knowing when to give, when to hold back, and when to trust that God's work in someone else's life doesn't require your complete and permanent sacrifice. Take care of your inner life, guard your peace, love wisely, and I'll see you in the next one.